Welcome to the Data War Room Asia podcast, where cybersecurity pros talk data security. Let's hear from Asian InfoSec professionals right here at the Data War Room Asia podcast.
Welcome to the Data War Room Asia podcast season 2. I'm your host, Resham Ganglani, and today we have a great show for you. We have a very special guest. It's our first lady guest on the show. And there's so much to describe her, so much to talk about her achievements. I need some notes on this. She is currently leading a global internal audit practice, including IT audit with a global real estate fund management MNC. She is the former PwC risk assurance partner, where she led the IT audit and advisory and business resilience practices. She was PwC Singapore's CIO and also the DPO. She is also the winner in 2022 Top Woman in Security for Singapore and ASEAN, the 2022 Woman Program of the Year Award, 2021 Woman in IT Outstanding Contribution Award Asia, and the 2021 SG 100 Woman in Tech recipient. She also has received the Top 20 Cybersecurity Woman in Singapore 2020 Award. Of course, outside of work, she volunteers heavily in the technology community space, where she actively promotes technology, including cyber awareness and adoption in both the business and IT security professionals and organizations. She is the current president of the ISACA Singapore Chapter. She spearheaded ISACA's SheLeadsTech program in Singapore since 2019 and has since framed the program in Singapore and cross-border female leadership experience and knowledge-sharing platforms. She has also successfully launched the 2021 SheLeadsTech mentorship program with dedicated mentee-mentor engagements to guide her career and all the SLT members accordingly. She's also pioneered the conversion program to achieve private-public non-profit objectives of bringing more women into the tech workforce. I've said so much about her. It's amazing. Please join me in welcoming our special guest for today, Jenny Tan. Welcome to our show. Thank you for joining us on Data War Room Asia.
Thank you, Risham.
Welcome to the show. And so many achievements. I don't know how you've done that. It's amazing. But, for everyone here, we know what you've achieved. But I think we should always start from the beginning. Maybe you can share your journey into the industry and how it's taken you, all your efforts, your achievements to achieve all of this.
Okay. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this session.
Pleasure.
I'm so honored to be the first speaker.
Yeah, season 2. We are honored to have you this morning. Yes.
Yeah. So a little bit about myself is that maybe a lot of people may not know, I actually wanted to be a medical doctor. Yeah, when I was very young. But as you may be aware that, in those generations, your parents are not as educated. Right. So they have no access to information. And they told me that, based on very layman's excuses, because I'm wearing spectacles, they say doctor cannot wear spectacles. Yeah. Oh. So...
That's okay,
yeah,
interesting.
Correct. So that was how it was back then when information is not so readily available. Right. So then, since I was discouraged to become a medical doctor, so I went on to tackle information technology, because back then I was looking at the industry, what is available for a female other than being a teacher. Yeah. Right. So then I've decided that since I'm a very logical person, a very structured person, and if I cannot perform medical appointment, I do something related to that nature. So that's how I went into tech risk, tech security, and tech audit. Yeah, correct. So this is something that I think is a good beginning, because when I get into this space, I'm always the minority, and I don't get discouraged. I find that it's actually an opportunity for a female to really embrace your dream, and move on to pursue what you think is worthy, I would say, Right. And at that point in time as well, technology, internet just started booming. So that's where I thought, while people are so active about getting into execution, rolling out, implementation, no one talks about risk, security, and audits. Yeah, and that's where I saw opportunities back then, and I pivoted myself, changed the course to really fully embrace into all these tech risk, tech audit related matters. Yeah, so that's how I started.
How did you enter? What did you study, and what was your first role, or where did you start your career at?
Okay. So my university, I did business computing,
Okay.
and don't let people know, but now I'm on podcast, I think people will know. I actually specialized in artificial intelligence.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But back then, when I came back, you can imagine 20 plus years ago, nobody heard of AI. Yeah. So there was very little jobs on AI. So I thought that, okay, I have to start somewhere. So I began my career as a software engineer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which organization was this?
Oh, it was with a software house.
Okay.
It was called TDWRA back then.
Okay.
It's a Hong Kong-based software engineering house. We service all the banks in Singapore.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then after that, you left that company and you joined.
Yeah, I left the company, went on to do something on business-related matters, where I joined Prudential, OCBC Bank, and I did a lot of what you call MIS type of management information system type of role, within the group finance function. So that's how I've built my capabilities in terms of straddling between business side of things as well as the technical side of things. And that's also, given me an opportunity to realize that a lot of business users, they really need help in the technology side.
Right. Did you, in your time when you entered the space, do you find it challenging to be, we'll talk more later about women and diversity in the workforce, but talking about you, what was your, struggle against, I'm sure even now, and especially then it was a male-dominated environment, and to see you have climbed so far and so much and work with all these prestigious organizations, was it ever difficult in your personal journey?
Oh, there are challenges. I think the main challenge is to really work very hard. Yeah, because I think back then people would think that as a female, if you are good, they will appreciate you. That's it, full stop. Right. But giving that opportunity, you really need to make yourself different from your male colleagues. Yeah, right. So worked very hard to surpass a lot of them, but at the same time, I make them shine as well. I think that's what brought me faster on the path than the rest, because I don't want to be seen as an individual who only fight for your own interest. Yeah, right. So I bring other people along. So that's how.
So a very early believer of the new so-called leadership guru principles, right? Of you practiced it very earlier on. So if I were to say, give me 3 moments in your career where, you took the jump or you made a decision that really changed your career or your direction to certain decisions that make you reach where you are today. What would be the 3 key moments of your life? First one maybe being, not being allowed to be a doctor and then heading into the IT sector, but what would the other 2 be?
I think the other 2 is after my software engineering experience, you always got to firefight and think on behalf. But I was pretty frustrated back then that I have to keep chasing after software languages. Yeah. So it brought me to a stage where I think I need to look at something that is more sustainable.
Right.
Yeah. So I took a pay cut, went into tech audit. Yeah, because back then audit is not a glamorous job, and now it's also not a glamorous job. Okay, it's a hard work job. Yeah, but it's not as recognized as current situation. So you have to suffer a pay cut. Right. So that's how it started off. But it was really worth it because it gave you the exposure to equip business knowledge from the other side of things. Right. Yeah, and being an auditor, by right, you have access to everyone, everything. Yeah. So that also helps you to open up your view about, how information is flowing within the organization, how decisions are being made. So that is the second point that I think have sparked some of these current positioning that I have. I think the third one is to meet a good mentor. Yeah. Right. So, but then a mentor sometimes is hard to come by. Yeah. So I'm pretty lucky that when I attended a training, surprisingly, it's at a public training, and somehow I clicked with my mentor back then, and we just started talking, and he started to give me guidance in terms of how you should put the right mindset into your career, and that's how it has carried me on.
Yeah, I think that mentor has inspired you to start the mentorship program in SheLeadsTech as well, right? So, this Data War Room Asia podcast is, we want to showcase Asian InfoSec professionals. And one of the motivation behind is we feel that, we've seen we're working with countries, vendors from the West, your counterparts from the West. We all, we've noticed ourselves, and I'm sure you have, there is always some differences of opinions, culture, and the way we talk about security and how we push it down to the general workforce in per se. So would you say that, I have a statement here and I would like you to give me your opinion on it, right? Some argue that Asian cultures prioritize harmony and collective interest over individual security or privacy, while Western cultures emphasize personal freedom, individual rights, and stuff like that. Now, in your experience, right, to what extent do you agree with this statement, and how has it, affected the way you look at security, the way your organizations look at security, and do you think there is a difference in the first place?
I think there is a difference, but the gap may be closer as we progress to the current state because of the way that information gets around pretty fast and the globalization of the mobility of people. So I would say maybe I break it in two parts.
Sure.
So the earlier part of our career, so that could be decades ago, Asian, generally, we are a community-based creatures, right? Yeah. So whatever we do, whatever we think, we always would like to make sure that our, I would say Asian does have this quote saying that you don't air your dirty laundry outside, right? Yeah. So you always want to protect your community, whichever that you represent. Yeah. So I think that's how things are done. Whereas from the Western side of things, they are very individualistic. They preach about human rights, right? Yeah, they wanted autonomy to do things. So that's how different in terms of culture. And when it comes to working with them, liaising with them, listening them out, I think from the Asian side of things, we tend to always listen first as compared to the Western. That's how I've observed. And we tend to take a step at a time. We are a little bit more prudent, but sometimes perhaps too careful. Yeah. Yeah, so these are the traditions that we can't run away. But I think when it comes to security, it's also not at an individual perspective. So let's say when we talk about information security, data protection, data privacy, etc., the Asian tends to look at the boss, right? Do we have a policy? Yeah. What's your policy about dealing with things? Yeah, and then from there, we act on it. Whereas the Western would be, what are you doing with my data?
So it's more like a top-down in Asian culture, and you're saying that in Western culture or in general overseas, it's more user-initiated, user-resulted.
Correct.
But do you think this has impacted in the way you have designed security policies, or you have decided to implement security implementations? Because having worked with a lot of security professionals and the previous guests that we have, it always seems to come up that sometimes it's very easy to push through policies because Asians are more obedient and compliant.
Correct.
But sometimes it's difficult because they don't understand the value of what we're trying to push through.
Yes.
What do you feel about this? Is it true? Has it changed? Is it still a challenge today?
Yeah,
especially with mobile phones in the environment?
It is. So it hasn't changed, okay? But like I said, the gap is getting closer.
Okay.
I think that is the advantage of information and awareness. Yeah. So it hasn't changed. So you're right. We tend to follow policies and they follow blindly. So they may not appreciate and understand at the individual level,
Right.
why are they doing it. So that's where if there is a situational change, they can't adapt quickly,
Right.
and they don't understand, you can't do this, you can't do that. They just follow strictly.
Right.
Yeah. So it does affect the strategies that we roll out. But I wouldn't think that you need a specific way of dealing with it. I would think a situational leadership management would
Right.
be more appropriate, because how security risks come into the organization
Right.
is all angles nowadays. Yeah.
Now, in terms of IT audit, right? You said IT audit, not very glamorous job,
It's not.
but you deal with a lot of users.
Mm.
Has the experience changed?
Oh, yes. So in the past, I would say when we come down to do the audit, everyone is just defending their ground, so they're pushing you away. But as time goes by, and everyone is also trying to adopt a little bit more risk responsibilities themselves,
Right.
they now look at it as in, okay, so the auditors are here. We are prepared for the bad news, but we welcome the recommendations. Yeah, so I see a change in mindset. Yeah.
So is it because you think it's compliance driven, or do you think it's just a natural change with the workforce becoming more aware and probably younger as well?
I think is the ecosystem.
Okay.
Yeah, because people are more open-minded nowadays and more sharing. So that's where information flow helps to enhance their knowledge. And at the same time, there are a lot of incidents occurring in the background.
Right.
And, everywhere and every day, every minute, you hear about a breach. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's how I think in the current situation, people tend to be a little bit more awake that, it's not about if you get hit, right? It's just when you get hit. Yeah.
Okay. So it's about matter of when you get
Yes.
breached, right?
Correct.
Right. So that brings to my next point, a good point here. Breaches and trust and security, right? What do you think, we hear about data breaches around the world. We hear about governments implementing their own compliance, their own laws, and now we've heard things about data residency as well. Now, and then we talk about, like countries like Indonesia or Malaysia or Thailand, per se, or even Singapore to a certain extent. They talk about data residency. Yes, you can put data on the cloud, but it has to be stored in Singapore and stuff like that. So how does the level of trust in technology and digital systems vary from now and then? And also from an Asian point of view and Western point of view? Because most of the cloud providers tend to be firms from the US and some from China as well. Nothing from our part of the world as terms of the big cloud players and providers, right? And how do you think this has changed or affected, and whether these kind of data residency laws are important? And the next question is, what's the implication of this?
Trust. Okay. I think definitely in the past, the agent don't trust the cloud that much. Yeah.
Right.
So it was really a testing ground. And that's in the past. But in the recent years, you will see that things have changed.
Right.
Again, I think it may be because of the maturity of the whole ecosystem as well.
Right.
Yeah. And at the same time, our regulators are supporting the change. Yeah.
Right.
Because I still remember that when I first served an insurance company trying to adopt cloud technology, they were not approved by MES. Yeah.
Okay.
So that was back then. It's about like 10, 15 years ago at least. Yeah. But then now regulators actually do accept cloud implementation, but with caveats, right? With the security measures in place. So I would say in the past, people don't trust technology, but now they trusted the technology. But the current situation I see is not just about the technology. I think the current situation I see is human being, as in the organizations, a lot of them may be blindly trusting the technology now.
Right.
Yeah, because they thought that when I move my data onto the cloud, I transfer all my responsibilities there. And as the cloud service provider, you have to have measures to protect my data, but it doesn't work that way. Yeah,
Right.
so that's one. The other thing is also from a regulatory perspective that you have mentioned. It's just getting everywhere. Every country is having all this data residency kind of restrictions.
Right.
But the unfortunate or the fortunate thing maybe to the organizations is that enforcement
Right.
of all these regulations are not there yet. Yeah, other than a few situations that's been happening, perhaps in China or in US, they may be a little bit more up there. But the rest of the countries, they roll out the regulation, but no enforcement.
No enforcement.
Yeah.
Which is also true, right? I mean, you look at a different point of view. Today, people are putting things on the cloud, you mentioned, right? They don't know what happens to their data. They don't know who's controlling it, who's accessing it. There's also a school of thought that all data should forever be encrypted, but then, the usability becomes questionable at times. But the question here also lies that with all these cloud providers that have come in, they also have now started local data centers, right? And this probably has helped the engagement of cloud. But as you mentioned, enforcement, right? Because as we know, and your expertise, disaster recovery, right? DR, your expertise. With DR in the cloud, how does data residency work? Because a lot of these data centers have, I have one data center in Singapore, or I have a cloud provider who has a data center in Indonesia. Now you want data residency, but then I only have one data center. So how my high availability will obviously be in another data center.
Yeah, correct.
Do you think this is still an issue?
Yes.
And a trust issue? So in your experience, I mean, without revealing your too much, what are the concerns that people should have when you're looking at, yes, you have to comply with data residency laws, but there's a need for DR as well. How will this work?
So some organizations, they are having conflicting strategies.
Right.
So they put things onto the cloud, but they back up on-prem. Yeah.
Okay.
So then, I would say conflicting strategy, right? Because
Yes.
you want to asset light and then end up you have it again. Yeah. So some organizations, they just have higher risk appetite.
Okay.
They just forgo the DR side of things. Yeah.
And just rely on the cloud provider to
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, which is interesting, right? Because you talk about data not being encrypted or data, you just trust the cloud. When we talk about, you just talked about people just transferring risk. Oh, my cloud provider has to protect my data, or the service provider has to protect my data, or the app provider, because we're consuming everything on mobile and stuff. Do you think that we've seen, like with the likes of WhatsApp introducing new SLAs or new EU laws where they are more invasive of our privacy, but they say end-to-end encryption, the integration between, say, WhatsApp and Facebook, and Instagram, and then you see the launch of apps like Signal and Telegram and chat and stuff like that. Do you think that I'm sure when you've gone to your colleagues in America or something like US, they tend to use less of WhatsApp and more of iMessage and stuff like that. Do you think Asian societies are more accepting of surveillance or so-called my data or my privacy not being so important because it's important they have visibility to be secure? I mean, one thing that I've traveled around and spoken to people about is, like how in Singapore we have a national identity called SingPass. And this whole SingPass concept, when I speak to certain people around the world, they're like, you mean your government tracks everything you do? You mean everything is down to a single ID number? And some countries don't even have a national ID, right? The closest they'll have is a social security number or driving license and stuff like that. Do you think that, as we started off the conversation today, you talked about Western ideologies and it being a bottom-up approach where individuals are more concerned about their privacy? Or do you think, like in Asian, every person should be identifiable so that their benefits from the government or their individual rights are properly monitored and given to them, because we know who they are, right? We don't have a total freedom of immigration. We don't have a total thing, but every individual is important. That's why we're monitoring, or we are notifying them. And especially in today's world where, if you talk about China, for example, you have facial recognition for payments, right? And because everyone's identifiable. What is your opinion on this in terms of the privacy aspect and the security aspect and the cultural differences here?
I think regardless Asian side or Western side, is you're being tracked. Yeah. Because as long as you're on technology,
right,
you are tracked. Yeah. So I think let's not kid ourselves as in, self-denial kind of thing. Yeah. It's just the way that it's been handled. Right. So I would think from the Western side, while they really teach about individual rights, etc., and the way that they use things.
Right.
But I don't believe that the government has no access to all these things. Yeah. It's just the way that it's being painted, okay, and it's being managed.
Right.
Whereas from the Asian side, in this aspect, I think I must respect that the Asian countries, the governments, for instance, they have been very forthcoming. Yeah.
Right.
They tell us that they are tracking it, they are doing this for whatever purposes, and we trust our government to manage it on our behalf,
right?
Because we know who to look out for, when things happen, right? And we know that they have to look after us regardless, because we place our trust in them when we voted for them. Yeah. So it goes back to perhaps a little bit about the culture that you mentioned, that we Asians generally would accept what's being said from top down,
right?
And also I believe perhaps information in the past has made us that way as well, is because we don't have access to all this information back then. So you need to fall back on somebody who is accountable for it. Correct. Yeah. So we accept that. And it hasn't failed us in that sense that we can still go back to the person to account for it. Is it done well or not is a separate matter to discuss. But accountability is still there. The enforcement, be it good or bad, is still there. And, we may have started as ignorant, as in we don't have enough information. But as we progress, we balance out the choice of convenience versus the risk. I think most of us accepted the risk. Yeah. And that's why we are still accepting the current way of handling it. And we are open about it. Yeah. So we are not hiding and not, hiding from the world, telling people that your data is not being tracked. Yeah. So what is it that you don't want it to be tracked? I think that is something an individual may have to, vote out, opt out kind of situation.
Yes. But it's an interesting point that you mentioned, right? We are more accepting. Asians trust the government. The governments are more open. I think we saw this when COVID hit.
Yep.
Right? When COVID hit, all of a sudden, very fast, all the governments in the region launched tracking apps, right? Singapore Trace Together.
Yep.
There was ISACA Singapore in Malaysia. There was, Pelungi. I think it's called Pelungi Data or something in Indonesia. And all these apps launched, and we were now all of a sudden being tracked where we were going. But because, the communication was, this is for the common good, this is to know whether you're exposed to COVID and stuff like that, this communication and the need for it helped us to a large extent monitor and contain COVID more, especially because in Asian societies, we're all living in very close-knit, high-rise buildings and close together, and the chances of getting infected with COVID was high, and to know they're exposed. The conversion from the fact that we were identifiable before, and then when COVID, all these apps launched, was smoother than, say, other countries where there were protests and stuff like that, which caused more infections, ironically, right? So I think this also talks about the decision-making process because we trust, there's a trust between the leadership and also an open acceptance that we're going to be tracked anyway, right? So going back to the, the apps that were launched, like Trace Together and stuff, and then you have, in your experience, launched many security initiatives in the workforce, and also in your tenure as ISACA member and president and SheLeadsTech, you always preach security as a basic fundamental for any organization. If you were to give advice to any up-and-coming security leader who may be listening to the podcast today or watching us, how do you advise them, or what do you think is the best way to balance the need for robust security practices, that you have, but also maintaining the, a good user experience, and I think you're best because you just said that from your experience in IIT audit, people didn't want to meet you on the first day, and now they're ready for you and prepared. But I'm sure there's still challenges, right?
Yes.
When you deploy new initiatives. What would you advise, or based on your experience, if you can tell us some anecdotes or stories or some implementations you've done where you've got challenges and how you've overcome such challenges?
I think the few things that I can think of that worked so far is still people related. Yeah. So first of all, I think let's say for myself, I would have to establish a good relationship with my stakeholders, especially the senior people, right? But when you establish that relationship, it's not just about doing reporting, etc. It's really how do you position yourself to have that conversation, to try to make them understand, because they're not risk trained, right? So to them is they will always rush for the first line because they are business people, right? Yeah. So you need to help them understand that risk is not there to stumble you.
Right.
Yeah. Risk assessment or risk management actually help them to make better decisions. Yeah.
Right.
But then having said that, a lot of senior leaders, they will agree and accept and support, but it's very hard to change the way they do things. Yeah.
Okay.
So you need regular engagements to persuade them to hear you out. As in, when they hear you out, you should not sell your security measures straight away. Yeah. Because people don't like to be told, especially senior people with high ego. Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah. So you really need to, when you talk to them, you have to tell them that you anticipated something, that you are thinking in their shoes, like wearing their shoes, that you're afraid that this may happen and you want to hear them out.
Right.
Yeah. So when you come
bring
from
out
that,
the problem first and
yeah,
and call out the potential issues and simulate.
yeah, but you don't bring out the problem like it is, because like I say, if you bring out saying that hey, I think there's a problem here, nobody wants to listen to you, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So you may have to do things like I foresee that there could be a potential problem, but you may have already anticipated it as well. What's your view? Yeah.
Right.
So I think that is better fit than you tell them the problem, because like I said, senior people don't like to be told. Yeah. So they rather like to be consulted.
Correct. So have you ever had a situation where, okay, I've got the leadership buy-in, I'm deploying a new initiative, but down the line, my users are all up in arms.
Yeah.
How do you handle that? Because you can't roll back so easily, right? You can't roll back your initiative. It's necessary. You've already got the board buy-in. You've already got the partners buy-in. How do you handle this? Because it's your team, right? Because it's always the people down the line who face the end users. How do you handle a situation like this? Because, yes, we say, okay, in the past, our Asian workforce is more complying, more obedient. Definitely we see as younger people come to the workforce, more aware, more educated, IT educated people, and we rely more on technology for our daily work, right? How would you advise to handle a situation like that?
So usually if I saw such challenges happening on the ground, I'll pull the brakes, and I'll interfere rather than getting my team there, because they are just also executing your instructions. Yeah. So I'll pull the brakes and I organize a quick focus group to talk to the respective people, to hear them out, and also to explain that there is a mandate of rolling things out. And then we try to see where are the challenges, and we try to fit into each other's schedules or whatever plans. Yeah. But we need to manage expectations, as in it's a mandate. We have to do it.
Right.
Unless someone, in the group is willing to sign off on the accountability side, right? Yeah. Nobody will, right? So at the end they will accept. But then the way that they accept, they need to appreciate the purpose, the intention of why this thing is being rolled out, rather than just force it down their throat, right? Yeah. So this is something that I find it very useful.
I like the word purpose, right? Do you think from the purpose, right, is very important to communicate in the beginning why we are doing things. And do you think that if we foster, in general, if you start off by saying, if you're talking to a security leader today, do you think the whole concept of security should be made aware and educated and put in a strong security culture in an organization that has a better impact when you roll out initiatives? Or do you think that security awareness should only happen when you're rolling out something?
No, it has to happen all the time. Yeah. So early on I mentioned breaches can happen anywhere,
right,
from all angles, anytime.
Right.
So you can't roll out security awareness only when you're rolling out an implementation on a security measure. So awareness has to be every time, continuously, and different approach, different angles. Yeah.
Right.
So it's not just always about phishing, you do the test. Yeah.
Correct.
But there are other things that you can also put in place to create that awareness. Be it another forum, or be a conference, or be just messaging, or we have Carnival Day, that kind of thing to deal with it. Yeah, it has to be constantly, continuously, but in bite size, because I realize people don't have high attention span.
Yeah. Hopefully they're having attention span listening to us, but yeah. But like gamification and stuff like that. You talk about Carnival Day. I think it's a very interesting concept, bringing security down to all levels of the organization and building a security culture. In your experience, you've moved from the IT audit, moved from PwC to another organization, and now you're sitting on the end user end per se. I'm sure in PwC also you were engaging end users, but now you've moved on. In terms of the security culture, do you see, and my questions have always been about Asians and Western ideologies, but do you see a difference between the younger, more aware or more tech-savvy individuals compared to people who have, maybe started their careers without IT and now everything is IT? Because we hear about, okay, let's just talk public, right? Public phishing scams that we've heard about. It's always an old auntie or an old uncle. But I'm sure the love scams that we see, there are a lot of young people involved as well. But do you see a difference? And do you see a bigger, or you need to adopt a two-step approach in these two different segments of society in the workforce?
From an tech GRC, I would say, right, the tech risk awareness perspective, no difference.
No difference.
Yeah, the younger ones are as ignorant as the older ones.
Okay. So you have it, that's a fact now. Right.
Yeah. So it depends on their role and their exposure. Okay. So but then if let's say given equal role, equal exposure, not a risk role, for instance, I would say no difference. But in terms of tech adoption savviness, definitely the younger ones are much faster than the older ones, right? Then how can we get the older ones to adopt it rather than faster, but adopt it and appreciate it? I think it's a two-way thing, right? So the company has to create an environment for them to learn. Yes. Within the team, there's bound to be multi-generation, right? So what is the head of department, for instance, doing about it to get the older people to take it on? Yeah. Right. And it also comes back to the person himself or herself. If he said that, he or she said that, I've been in the workforce for 50 years and I'm still able to contribute without being so tech savvy, so being resistant about it. It depends on how much you need this person, right? So if you need this person a lot, the resistance will be high. If this person's job can be replaced by technology, for instance, he or she will be very keen to deal with. So sometimes when you deal with such older generation people who is very resistant to learn, my approach has always been scenario-based. Yeah. So you create them a scenario and show for them to imagine himself or herself is in this scenario, then you'll pick up the skill.
So it's more about, so I think it's fantastic. You're talking about fostering a security culture, different approaches to a different group of people. But what I've seen is always been, this is my policy, follow it, right? But now you're telling me that in your experience, you've adopted scenario-based education.
Yes.
To different groups of people, especially those who are resistant.
Yeah.
I think it's a very, very innovative approach, a novel idea, and something that I think our listeners will definitely look at, because in my experience in the security industry, it's always a challenge. Security always faces resistance, right? And especially where in the last 5 years, and especially with the pandemic, we've moved from on-prem to cloud to stopping people from doing a lot of things to opening the gates and allowing doing everything, and then pulling some back and say, no, but you have to have multi-factor authentication, passwordless authentication. You have to do this, you have to do that, and so much change. But I think it's a great approach that you've mentioned today, where give them a scenario, let them figure it out in the scenario, and then the understanding will come to the space.
Yep.
The pandemic brought about a lot of movement to cloud, a lot of movement to third parties, scalability, availability, all these kind of things. And then we see in the last few years the concept of third-party risk, and now I think MAS has defined it as operational risk management, ORM. Now, I'm sure this is part of your role today as well. Can you advise or give some insights when it comes to risk management, operational risk management, right? And being, from an individual basis and in your position as president of ISACA, how do you, in Singapore chapter, how do you identify this risk? And what's your approach to mitigating it and managing it as well? Is there an ideology? Is there a best practice? Or how do you approach it?
Whether is there a best practice, I'm not so sure, because I think even with my experience, I have not covered a lot of other areas. Yeah. But I think the good practice is always a lot of training support. Yeah. Okay. Because it goes back to awareness again. And the other thing is also I keep reminding a lot of peers and also management that don't assume anybody in tech knows tech risk. Yeah. So don't assume that, because the training background, the objectives are very different from the two individuals, right? Yeah. So this assumption actually helped a lot in the management when it comes down to designing or hiring the tech risk or security people to support the organization.
What about the third parties or the external vendors? Because compared to last time, the vendors used to come in-house and do something in your organization. Now, everything's cloud-based, there's remote staff, there's remote access, there is a whole different risk paradigm that's opened up, right? It's like we've opened up this can of worms and we don't know, sometimes we don't know who we are in.
Yes, correct.
Right? And there's so much outsourcing being done. You outsource to company A, and the company A then has a team in Singapore, Malaysia, India. You don't know what's happening, who's serving you, because the technology has been brilliant in making these borders disappear. What would be your approach, or how have you looked at tackling these kind of challenges or visibility in that aspect?
Yeah. So I think first of all, the requirements or expectations from an organization on third party has to be made clear at the point of requesting for quotation or tenders.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have to really put your expectations up front.
Right.
Yeah. And it also depends on the responses that this third party has given on the so-called expectation, right? That you can assess. You can assess whether this person or this company, this provider, is it up to standard, or at least a minimum standard?
Right.
And of course, what is your organization risk appetite, right?
Correct.
So and also the setup of this organization. If let's say this service provider is a $2 company, you know it, right? You have no accountability from this service provider. Yeah. So track records become really important. How much information they are willing to share from an architecture perspective when
Right.
they do that integration with us, when we do our migration. How thorough are their migration plans? All those things will tell you how serious, how robust this particular service provider is.
So it's
in.
about communications.
Yes.
And even before they become a vendor. Right.
Yes.
And when they become a vendor, it's the continuous
Correct.
communication.
Oh, yes, definitely. You need to regularly reach out to them. Like, for instance, from an audit perspective,
Yes.
have they done their, SOC reporting?
Yes.
Yeah. So if they have, send us the report.
Yes.
And also, there must be on the organization side that put the data onto the cloud service provider, for instance.
Right.
You must have oversight monitoring mechanisms. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you think that, a lot of people, right, going back to what you said earlier, where, I've given my data responsibility to someone else. But in a corporate perspective, at the end of the day, your organization is always responsible.
Yeah, correct.
No matter what happens, right? So
Correct.
you talked about documenting the risk, and risk is continuous, right? It doesn't disappear, right? Especially with the cloud space. Even I audit you today, like the Log4j, the SolarWinds, all
correct.
this, you can be exposed any day, anytime, right?
Yes.
While the CVs all come in.
Yeah.
Do you think that from your perspective that when incidents happen, when breaches happen, and you earlier mentioned it's a matter of when, not if. When they happen, how should organizations react? Means I've seen organizations, knee-jerk reactions, terminate contracts, or do you advise it's better to engage vendors who've gone breach and look at, okay, how do I limit my risk exposure to it? Or if you have been exposed because your organization's data was part of that breach, how would you handle it if it happened to you today, for example? What would you be your methodology approach to these kind of scenarios? Because I've seen a lot of professionals say a lot of profanities because they are so frustrated that the vendor they are working with has now been breached and their job could be on the line. I think job on the line, you can't predict these things, right? You can't predict when breaches will happen. But I think when these things happen, stepping up and taking ownership of the problem and dealing with it is very important for any risk or security personnel in an organization. How do you think the approach should be?
I think if I have the right to deal with all this approach, this matter,
Right.
the approach is definitely to first of all contain the issue,
Right.
and should not make any rash decision at that point in time. So once you contain the issue, you can find out more because you need time to find out more. Yeah, and you need to have a ready person to accountable for all these matters because it cannot be this issue happens out of nowhere and then you don't know what happened. I think that is a not acceptable situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So while you try to contain the matter, investigation should start.
Right.
Yes. And during the investigation, other things will be held constant. So you have to really make sure that you have a clean situation to look at. And you need the vendor, the service provider, to really work with you to find out really what's wrong. Getting frustrated now is no point because from a legal standpoint, you will account for it later on anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. But you have to contain the damage. Find out what's going on. So in order to do this, the organization must have a very good incident response cycle and process, and should not be afraid. I mean, the CISO or anybody else should not be afraid of being fired because of all these things. And it also comes back to the very first point that we were discussing back then, right? If you understood your risk responsibility, you would have done the required steps to deal with it.
Right.
If it happens, it happens.
Right.
Yeah, it's not like because you are negligent, right? Yeah, so I think this is very important that for the risk professionals out there, do not only act when things happen. So you should start doing the right thing in the first place. When it happens, you have the ground to support you that, you have been doing the right things.
You start at 50-60% rather than starting from zero.
Precisely.
It's interesting. I really think you could have become a doctor because your whole approach is exactly like how a doctor approaches, right? Stabilize the patient, containment, do investigations concurrently, do all your tests, work with the family and the patient to solve the problem.
Yes.
I think it's the same. You really should have could have become a doctor for sure. What's amazed me today in our conversation is that I consider you a pioneer in the industry. Not only a pioneer in thought process, but also a pioneer for a lot of females in industry. And based on what you've done, and you brought diversity, you've started the SheLeadsTech program. I would like, for our viewers who don't know what SheLeadsTech is all about, maybe you can share a bit more of what SheLeadsTech is about.
Okay, yep. So SheLeadsTech program is actually a diversity and inclusion program, a spin-off from ISACA.
Okay.
So what this program does is, like the name implies,
Right.
Encouraging more female to come into the technology space, and that's why it's SheLeadsTech.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what make you decide to start this? Did you see some challenges happening? Did you speak to a lot of women in industry and found out that they need a bit more mentorship, or they need more acceptance at board levels?
Mm-hmm.
Or what led to this?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I spearheaded this program in Singapore, the initial thought is that I just wanted to make women, the female, being more confident when you are in any of the tech roles. Yeah.
Right.
So I'm not just looking at leadership role. Yeah. So that's why in this program I preach a lot about self-leadership rather than just a rank leadership. Yeah.
Right.
Because as we mature in the technology space, you realize that there are many roles available. Yeah.
Yes.
And we need different type of personality, different type of people to come into it. And traditionally, female will make up very few percentage at the leadership role is because along the way they drop off because of family. Yeah,
Right.
this is a traditional things, right? But as we enter this era,
Yes.
the gig economy and everything else
Yes.
made it possible. I think it is the right time
Right.
to encourage more female to come back to the tech space, and also to encourage the non-tech female to join us, because their skill set becomes very useful. Because I'm sure you have seen, like you mentioned many times, about user experience.
Yes.
Those user experience professionals, majority are from non-tech.
Right.
Because they come with their own set of skill set and experience to adopt this
Right.
digital skill set, right? So I think for Singapore context,
Yes.
we are unlike other third world countries, emerging countries,
Right.
where female are deprived of a lot of things.
Right.
I think our females, maybe we have to fight harder,
Yes.
but we are not really that deprived as compared to other countries. So what we need is really a nudge, a platform to encourage any rank of the tech role to embrace self-leadership, be confident of who you are and what you can do. Your one small drop of water make up the whole, sea, right? Yeah. So this is something that I'm trying to push forward. Yeah.
I think it's fantastic. And for those of you who have not followed Jenny on LinkedIn, we'll definitely tag her in the video, because she talks about her journey as a mentor and together with your mentee on the LinkedIn at times. And it's a great read. Also inspired many people to come in to be mentors in SheLeadsTech as well, and also join the space. And, when you started off till today, do you think acceptance of women or females in general in the IT security or cyber risk industry has changed? Is there still a resistance? And what is the difference, or what is the biggest challenge you faced as a female in this space?
I think it has changed. The acceptance level has increased a lot more.
Right.
Biggest challenge is actually, for me in this program, looking at the people whom I've interacted or helped,
Right.
the biggest challenge is themselves. Because they themselves lack confidence.
Right.
They lack guidance. Yeah. So that's why they are lost. They don't know what to do. So I think once you have given them the guidance that they require, train them on all these confidence things through mentorship, through a lot of soft skill type of workshops,
Right.
and a lot of sharing from other people, learn and inspire by other people, they do improve, and I see changes.
Right.
And that's how I think a lot of our corporate partners,
Yes.
they have been very, very supportive of the program, because they have seen how much effort we put behind the scene
Yes.
to get all these people up to speed. Yeah.
And I think we've seen more women leadership, more female leadership in government as well.
Yes.
Come in, our minister in Singapore is female, and we've seen that in the region as well. And I think it's an important role that SheLeadsTech has played, ISACA has played, you have played in bringing the whole female tech leadership industry to come forward. I think it's a great initiative. As a father of a daughter, I've talked to my daughter about SheLeadsTech,
Okay.
and I asked her to read it up and understand that it's, the world's open for you. It's what you want to do, right? But today, as we wind down the show, if you were to give an advice to someone young or someone who's done a mid-career change into IT security or IT risk, and maybe moving into a leadership position, or considering that, this is the industry I want to be in, what advice would you give them? With all your experience today, they're starting fresh, and we've seen a lot of mid-career change, right? Coming into this space because it's a hot space.
Yeah.
What advice would you give them? What does Jenny say? Please listen to this so that you understand what you're getting into and how to handle the situation.
I think there's no magical potion for it. I would say really commit to your passion, to your interest.
Right.
Because it takes a lot of courage and effort to pursue something new, or to pursue a career that you want to be in,
Right.
regardless whether you want to switch to tech or not. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's the same formula. You really need the perseverance, the consistency, the commitment to it. There will be ups and downs in your path. Yeah, it's inevitable.
Right.
But if you truly believe that this is what you want to do, then you need to be open-minded to accept all criticism or constructive feedback to improve yourself. And the most important thing that you can do that is have a very healthy mental state of health. Mental state, yeah.
Right.
Because if you are not positive, you are a very negative person, right? It's very dangerous, because your colleague or your peers just need to mention to you something negative,
Right.
3 or 4 times, you believed it already. Yeah.
So it's really your own individual resilience.
Yes, correct. And find the right platform or community to help you along the way. Like, for instance, while I'm not promoting for where I am leading the association now, but I do see the benefit of similar associations as well.
Yes.
That when you have a community that does this area of expertise, right, you can get help easily with them along the way, because there's always platforms opening up to members to outreach, and for you to decide, what kind of help that you want. The help doesn't mean that you need someone to give you a job. No. Rather, the help is from a resourcing point of view. Yeah,
Right.
resources are available.
Definitely.
For you.
I mean, I've seen, it's very great achievement. You're president of ISACA Singapore Chapter, and I think we should highlight that. And I've also seen that in general, ISACA has been launching, they were all about certified professional status. Recently, I've seen a lot of certificates in certain, cybersecurity or data protection or data privacy being launched. Without saying that you've lowered the bar, right? I think you've created a foundation entry level.
Yes.
what has the thinking behind that been, and how has the take-up rate and the response been?
I think we are also looking at spreading or driving our domain knowledge to non-tech professionals. Yeah.
Right.
And we also wanted to adapt to what the environment needs are. Yeah. So that's why we have created all these certificate levels kind of entry points. Also without stressing, those members who are not in the tech risk professionals, right? That they wanted to learn something, but maybe they don't want to get into too in-depth techie part of it. Yeah. So the certificate level works very well.
So, ChatGPT and many thing else, right? The generative AI, and early on, right in the beginning of the show, you talked that you came from AI.
Yeah.
A very long time ago, and I'm sure the
Things
concept
have
of
changed.
AI is very different.
Yes.
What is your view on ethics and integrity? Because we've heard talks about plagiarism. We've heard talks about somebody giving presentations or coming up with ideas from generative AI, which I personally think is, it's a platform. But then you still have to give your input. What is your view? Give me both your personal view, and if ISACA has any stand on it, on ethics, AI, compliance, the whole thing coming together.
I personally, even I think from a chapter perspective, I think we treat AI as another tool.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just that how do you deal with this tool with this capability? Yeah.
Right.
So it's similar to any other tools that you're using. Do it right. You know that if you want to quote something as yours, the originality, we have to follow that principle, right? So that's something that regardless whether it's AI or not, do something right by the professional standards, and also recognize it that AI is another tool. And if it's another tool, it means it's supposed to support or facilitate certain things, but it should not replace everything that you do, right? And it should also be exposed to similar security measures that any other tools are facing. And that includes data leakage kind of thing, because you can't generate things without putting more data into it.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's a learning model that you
Precisely.
have.
Yeah.
Right?
Correct.
So in terms of how do you feel that AI should be governed? Do you think, just like organizations have security policies, we should now start having AI-related policies and the use of AI? Do you think?
I think we should, but maybe we don't call it an AI policy, but rather because AI relies a lot on data. So perhaps beef up your data policy to include a section on the usage of AI.
But it's down to individuals, right? Today, if I'm an employee of an organization, I'm using the tool for my benefit. Organization may or may not have visibility. I'm passing off the work of AI as my own. How should this be governed?
It's back to how when you sign the employment letter, there are certain clauses, right, that you have to do.
So
with
you are
it.
saying that AI or data protection policies in terms of how we work with AI and how we use it should come at the employment and the HR level as well.
Yes. And at the tool level, if I treat AI as a tool, then in any organization, there's always this computing usage policy, right? Yeah. So yes, is AI one of the approved tool that you can use? Yeah. So you actually address it from an organizational IT functional kind of aspect.
Right.
At the same time, you address it at the employee, that means the personnel level, that you need to be very careful, because even if I don't use AI, I use any other tools.
Right.
As long as it compromised what I'm supposed to protect, the organization data in.
So it should have a code of ethics for sure.
Yes, correct.
So Jenny, it's been a great session talking to you today, and thank you for being our first guest on season 2.
Thank you.
Last parting words for anyone listening in terms of IT security or cyber risk. What would you want to let them know?
I think, first of all, don't let convenience overrule any other practices that you have. I think that is very important. And also understand and acknowledge your risk appetite. Because without that, you can't balance the cost and benefit of things.
Right.
Yep. And happy journey in this security path, because it's every day, expect the unexpected. And keep your cool. Yeah, it's a continuous journey.
And there you have it. Keep your cool. And thank you very much, Jenny, for joining us today. Always keep your cool. It's been the first episode of Data War Room Asia. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon on next episode. Thank you, Jenny, again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Be sure to subscribe and look out for our next episode. Cheers.